Thank you for taking interest in my neighborhood, and more importantly, thank you for queuing up the whole idea of the charrette as a planning technique. And I do have a presentation here to go through it a little bit. But first, to do that, we have to sort of talk about the comprehensive planning process we've come to know it in Delaware. Now, I'm a professional planner. I've been a planner for more years than I'd probably like to admit. I've written a lot of comprehensive plans for towns as small as Viola, which is less than 200 people, and as large as Dover. I've written 2 plans for Dover in my career. I've done this process a lot, and I've become pretty familiar with how it works. I'm going to go through it very quickly for you so you get a sense of how the process goes. And the flowers are blooming. Why do we have flowers? Well, it's because it's spring. It's spring, and you've decided as a town you want to start your new comprehensive planning process. And the way I believe we should start a comprehensive plan process is with the public outreach. And there's a variety of different ways to reach the public with your community workshops, surveys, exercises, mapping exercises, things of that nature. And all of my plans have always started with some kind of public outreach. What happens after that point? Well, we planners, either whether we're consultants or town staff, go back for a month or 2, sometimes more, and we analyze the results. We collect data and information, and then we come back to the community. And what happens then? It's summer. And we share our results with the community and get some feedback. And because it's summer, the kids are out of school, people are going to the beach, maybe not as many people show up. And so then we go back, we take that information, we go back and draft a plan. And then it's fall. And we go through a series of public hearings, and we get some sense of what the public thinks about the plan we've come up with. And they're sometimes not the same people that we started out with. But we soldier on, and we create a plan that we think is the best consensus of what the community has said. And by then we come back, and it's winter, and we start our public hearings, and we get everything solved, or so we think, and things move along. And of course it's spring again, and we're ready to adopt our comprehensive plan. Almost a year later, or sometimes a year later, we get back together, but wait, somebody at the city clerk's office forgot to notice the meeting, and here we are in summer again, ready to adopt our plan. And I put this out there because the time between the very beginning and the time a final plan is done is often a very long time, and there's good reasons for that with the comprehensive plans we do in Delaware. But the folks that were at that original public workshop have probably forgotten what was discussed, or lost interest, or maybe there are different people that are coming out to the meetings now. And that's a real challenge for a lot of communities and a lot of citizens in those communities to feel like they're being heard and being invested in the process of creating the plan for their future, which is where we come up with a charrette. Charrette is a different process. I'm going to run through quickly what that means and then go through an example of a charrette we just did in Smyrna. But a number of us throughout the state were trained by a group called the National Charrette Institute. That's what NCI stands for. This is actually kind of a formal training program. It took, I believe, the first training was 3 days. The second part of it was 2 days, so 5 days of training. So I now am a certificate holding charrette person. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I guess it qualifies me to use this slide and to teach this little session. But the NCI Charrette is a multi-day collaborative planning event that harnesses the talents and energies of all affected parties to create and support a feasible plan that represents transformative community change. And this came from NCI, so they wanted me to say that, I think. What does the term charrette mean? Because we're short on time, let's just agree that it's French, and I'm going to explain by showing you what it actually is. Who can initiate the charrette? This is where it starts to differ a little bit from our comprehensive plans as we've known them. Certainly local government can initiate a charrette. Also a state agency could do so as well if the issue is surrounding something that a state agency is responsible for. Interestingly, private developers have in the past initiated charrettes, usually around larger projects that are going to impact a significant aspect of a community. They can start working with the local government and say, hey, let's do a charrette to try and figure out what we want to do here. And it can and probably should be a collaborative effort among any or all of the above. Charrette brings decision makers together in one place for a concentrated effort to create a detailed, feasible plan. Involves everyone in a facilitated process so that everyone is heard and no one dominates. And this is one of the things that makes it unique. It's the idea that it's a compressed time frame and that there's feedback loops in the planning process where you're always touching base with the citizens, the stakeholders, residents, elected officials as you move through. And here's basically how it might work. You start with a public visioning meeting, not much different than the meeting I talked about in the spring of that Mythical Towns comprehensive planning process. The planners, which might be town planners, urban designers, consultants, whoever, developed some concepts based on what they heard from the public. Then there's the feedback back from the public. What do you folks think? This is not a done deal. It's just the beginning of our plan. You take information from that, create a more detailed version of the plan. Again, the public reviews it, provides feedback, develop the final plan, and then confirm it with the public. Now, this could sound like that if the time frame were from spring to the summer of the next year, that would kind of sound like our planning process we do for our comprehensive plans in Delaware. However, this all happens in a time frame of about a week, and that's how it's different. Everybody gets engaged in a very compressed time frame, and a lot gets done in a very short period. And that is pretty much what this slide says. A couple other things. Often charrettes are held on or near the project site, so they're in the town or in the area or in the neighborhood in which you're planning for. At the end of it, you end up with a very feasible plan that's very specific to that area. And again, 4 consecutive days is about the minimum, and a lot of people say, well, can we do a charrette in a day or two? Probably not, because you need that public feedback and that validation of the concepts that you're working on. So I would say at this point, probably 4 is the minimum of what you'd want to plan for a charrette. Got a lot of quotes about people that have talked about charrettes. Here's one that I picked out. The charrette epitomizes public empowerment in the planning process by allowing the design team to work with the public, which is usually reserved for developers. The public is able to combine their unique knowledge of the community with the skill and expertise of the design team. That, to me, kind of epitomizes what a charrette is like. Which gets me to the Route 13 corridor plan in Smyrna. It's a charrette we just completed in August 20 to 24th this year. And you notice at the podium there, that's me. And you see from the back that's all the hair I've lost since I've been working with the city of Milford and Mr. Carmine. I had a full head of hair before I met him about 10 years ago. But the other thing this slide demonstrates is that I think I missed one of the early meetings as we started planning for this charrette. And at that meeting that I was not present at, I was elected to be the facilitator of the charrette. So I had a lot of work to do, so my point is, don't miss any of the meetings. One of the first things I did, and the NCI has a lot of templates and a lot of framework for how to do this. This is my version of the schedule for how that week would work. And as you might imagine, when you've got a team of people, we had at times 3 or 4 consultants. We had probably 4 or 5 planning staff, both from our office and from the town of Smyrna, all trying to work together in a coordinated process for a week. There was a lot of moving parts, and it took a very detailed schedule in order to make it happen. I'm not going to ask you to memorize this, just to demonstrate that it was a very well choreographed effort, and the NCI training really helped us pull this together. You might also ask, how did the community know that the charrette was going on? Well, not only did Smyrna do an excellent job with their normal avenues of posting it in the paper and on their website, they created a special website for this particular process, but the town staff actually went out and put these flyers in the mailboxes of every single property along that corridor, and it's a 3-mile-long corridor. Some of the land is vacant, but they really went above and beyond to try and make people aware that during this week in August, we're talking about the Route 13 corridor. Please come out at these opportunities to share your thoughts. Just give you a little quick prelude to what the town's all about. This is the downtown historic Main Street in Smyrna. Again, one of our most historic and charming communities in Delaware. And this is the Main Street today, but it looked much like this many, many years ago. It's very well preserved. The Route 13 corridor was the subject of our studies, and it was built 1933 as a bypass to that downtown area of Smyrna. So as time went on, the Route 13 corridor served that regional transportation function, and also it became the commercial corridor, the commercial strip of a rapidly suburbanizing area around Smyrna. And of course, you notice in 1956, peaches were 65 cents a basket, and things have gone up since then. So the corridor developed through those times as a commercial strip, as we would see a lot of places in Delaware and around the country. Then what happened? 1992, we built Route 1, which bypassed the bypass. And what that's led to, other than a lot quicker way to get up and down the state and to the beach if you're from the north, or to Wilmington if you're from the south like me, it led to an identity crisis for Route 13. And everybody in Smyrna, and when I say everybody, it's like citizens talk about this, business owners along the corridor talk about this, People coming through town say, oh, what a boring town, it looks like everywhere else I've seen. Nobody was really happy with the way the corridor had sort of evolved. It kind of didn't have that sense of place that Jim Tischler was talking about. It just seems like it's kind of stuck in you know, a mode where it doesn't know what it wants to be. It's no longer a regional transportation route. It's sort of a commercial area still. There's a lot of businesses there. But it's maybe not doing as well as it could, nor is the corridor as friendly to pedestrians and bicycles and buses as it could be. So what do? The town decided they wanted to hold a charrette. The Kent County Metropolitan Planning Organization was very involved, and they helped organize and fund the study. My office was involved in terms of staff time. The Town of Smyrna planning staff got together. And we all started, how do we get started planning for this 3-mile corridor through Smyrna? Well, we did another unconventional thing for us planners. We started with a market study. And the reason for this, I believe it was Ed McMahon this morning who said, you know what, our commercials, we're way overbuilt with commercial strip in this country. And, you know, as a planner, I kind of knew that. Wasn't sure how to quantify it in terms of Smyrna. I'm not going to read all these points, but the bottom line what we found is there is no way that it would be economically feasible to build a 3-mile long commercial strip in Smyrna and have it be economically viable. That would not work. What the market study told us was that housing was a strong aspect in Smyrna, that convenience retail type goods are very strongly represented in Smyrna, but that shopping goods were not. So one of the recommendations here was there could be about 225,000 square feet of new commercial activity along that corridor. That's not very much. That's a little bit smaller than the average Walmart they build today. And oh, by the way, a big box store is probably not in the cards for this area for the next foreseeable future, at least 10 years and maybe 20. So armed with that knowledge, we went, and the next step, before the charrette actually got started, we met with stakeholders. Who were the stakeholders? Public officials, business owners, heads of agencies that were responsible for parts of the corridor, the environmental agencies, DelDOT, and we interviewed those individuals to try and find out what was it that was important about the corridor, what did they think about the corridor. You know, some of these quotes here, you know, sort of epitomize what we heard. Route 13 is undeveloped, lacks character and purpose, and is built for through traffic, not local trips. That was a common sentiment that we heard going into the charrette process, and it was valuable information as we started meeting with the public. So we started on Monday with a kickoff meeting, and this was a very well-attended interactive meeting where everybody sat around the table. They shared their thoughts, shared their visions for what the Route 13 could be. They worked on maps, they drew things. We got a lot of good information out of that. We went back, this is one of our consultants, we went back and we developed alternatives for what the corridor could turn out to be. And if you'll notice, this was a very physical, very design-oriented process. And a lot of the work we did was not with our fancy computer maps and GIS systems. It was with, you know, printed out maps and tracing paper and magic markers and blue dots and red dots and you know, flip charts and things of that nature. Brought me back to my graduate school days before GIS was really that viable, and I really appreciated getting to work with markers again. But it also underscores that this is not something that was meant to be, it was meant to be an accessible process. Anybody could come in the studio and draw on a map with a piece of tracing paper, and we could take that input and work from there. Came up with 2 themes. One theme was sort of the Commerce Corridor, which was more of a, you know, continue the strip commercial development but make it a lot nicer. The other was a more mixed-use theme, a lot of what you've heard from the placemaking and things of that nature. This is just a visual of the type of thing that we produce. This is the Commerce Corridor for one section of the Route 13 area. And the Live Workshop Play, you notice this starts getting into the form of how do we concentrate that development into a node of activity that could be walkable, it could be bikeable, it could link to other areas. So we had these 2 alternatives that we went back to the public with. We opened our studio. We worked in the basement of the town hall. We opened our studio to a you know, open house, and also at any time people could stop in. And the point I'll make here, we're there for the week. Everybody in town was curious about what we were doing. A lot of people stopped in to hear what was going on, to share their ideas, and it sort of got a buzz around town. Everybody wanted, what are these flyers in our mailbox? Well, I got to see what's going on. What's the town doing to me? And it really helped bring a lot of people through to participate in this process. Wednesday, we had an alternatives workshop where we put these 2 alternatives together. We walked people through. We got their thoughts about which they preferred, which parts of which ones they preferred. And you'll notice one thing I'm going to point out here, there's a screen in the back of the room there, sort of in the back of this PowerPoint. There's a little video that was running there, and one of the things that we planners often have challenges with is there's a lot of planners in the state that are working on very technical, very groundbreaking work. We have a real hard time of interacting with the public to share how that goes and how that relates to what they're doing with their planning for their community. So I want to take a minute to talk about, this is the DelDOT State Smart Transportation Initiatives model, and I think I said that right, Ralph. I was like, doing okay, okay. And this is very groundbreaking work, both locally and nationally, that this, DelDOT's doing, and three things that make it important. First of all, it allows you to do different scenarios for community design and model the impacts of those two scenarios on the transportation system. The second thing is it allows DelDOT to model the impacts on not only auto trips, which are most models throughout the country do, but also bus trips, bike trips, and ped trips. You know, who will walk, who will bicycle based on different land use configurations. And then it ties it to a sort of a simulation type of thing where you can actually see what that might look like as time goes on. And here's just an example of, you know, same piece of property. You know, on the left there we have, you know, the traditional single family detached. On the right is maybe a more, you know, higher density but interconnected or mixed use type of project. And the important part about this is this was playing in the background during that workshop, and people didn't walk up and say, hey, I'd really like to talk about the algorithms behind your model. No, they said, hey, what's that? You know, why are there two different styles of housing, and what are these people walking around for? And it allowed them to talk and have a conversation with the DelDOT planners who were there to explain the benefits of different styles of development and what the impacts were with different things. And I do believe that I can get back to my PowerPoint. If I don't, Ted is going to help me. Am I in the right place, Ted? Ah, look at that, perfect. So looking at this case study, you know, we actually, this is one of the early versions of making this a real project for DelDOT. We took an actual piece of property along the Route 13 corridor and developed it two different ways. The base way, which is kind of the traditional suburban method, and then the smart growth, which basically differs in that it has a little bit more density, but it has interconnections and it has some mixed uses, which is commercial linked to the residential. And again, you get a lot more density out of the smart growth work, so that's more efficient if you're a developer, more efficient if you're a town providing utilities, so that gives you an indication there. But what if you're a resident and you say, well, that's going to be a lot more traffic? Well, yes and no. And what the models allows DelDOT to demonstrate is that, you know, there's actually per unit less vehicle miles traveled, less traffic on adjacent roadways, and less emissions per unit if you do it in a more efficient land use pattern. There's a lot of math and a lot of science behind this, but it really was interesting to see it done in a community workshop where people could really stop and talk and think about, you know, what does this mean for me and what are the alternatives if I develop in that way. So after that workshop, we went back to the studio, and there's another one of our consultants, that's Betsy. You know, she's developing some of the final drawings. We had a final presentation. This was at Belmont Hall in Smyrna. You know, you see there's no people in this. We had the various different things. That's because they were here in the buffet line. We fed people very well. That's one of the things Charrette training teaches you. You must have food. You must make people comfortable and happy. And I'm glad I spoke after lunch because you're all full and happy and you're being a very good audience, so thank you very much. And again, we gave a full presentation on the alternatives and the final plan that was sort of the synthesis of what we heard from the public and what we heard from the stakeholders. And here's me at the very end. I'm ecstatic because it's Friday and I'm going to be able to go home that night at a reasonable time, maybe sleep in Saturday morning. It was a pretty intense process, but it was worth it. We got a lot of work done in a very short period of time. We had great public engagement. And we came up with a number of plans. This was this is the northern section you saw before, but it's a synthesis of some of the aspects of the low workshop play and the commerce corridor. We actually did photorealistic renderings. Now, you look at that building across the street there, that's an actual street in Smyrna along the corridor. That building doesn't exist. It's photo rendered onto that site. It allowed people to talk about, you know, what it would look like with a more town style of building, a multi-story or multi-use building, what it would look like up close to the street. And believe it or not, you know, the citizens that were participating, they really gravitated to this idea once they realized that it could be done. you know, buildings close to the sidewalks. Wouldn't this be great across from the Ford dealer if you had it? And the Ford people love this. They're like, wow, if we had a little shop over there with a nice restaurant stuff, we could walk across the street and, you know, get lunch, and it would really, you know, benefit our business as well as the land we own across the street. Talked a lot about pedestrian considerations. You know, here's, you know, this is actually another photo rendering. There's no sidewalk here now, and everybody in the town's wondering why. Why can't I walk from point A to point B? This is what a sidewalk could look like in that particular location going into town. This is November. We actually have a draft plan document already created. This ended up in late August, and if you know anything about the way we planners develop plans, this has been lightning quick to get a document put together that we're sharing with the Smyrna Town Council and Planning Commission relatively shortly. And it has an implementation plan, part of it, which specifies what needs to get done, what entities are responsible for doing it, and the time frame that it's going to take to get it all completed. And interestingly, when Mr. Tischler was talking, he talked a lot about form. Well, you're right, it is. The town is actually thinking about, and has been thinking about before this even started, of a form-based type of code and almost pre-permitting the types of buildings and uses that would be along the corridor, so that if a developer comes in and wants to do something that's based on what the plan says, they really should be allowed to go forth and do that without too many extra regulatory hoops. That is the goal, and that has been the intention of the town, and I think the town is one step closer to achieving that with this plan. And I will just give you a couple final thoughts. The NCI, the National Charrette Institute, when they do the training, they say you can do a charrette for anything from just a meeting where you're going to do a strategic plan amongst your organization to, you know, single development projects when you're getting really into it. From my brief experience of that, being involved in that one charrette process, actually I've been involved in a couple, but that was the first one I was staffed to. I believe it's best used when you're working on a particular neighborhood or a corridor or a real planning or a master plan project. It's not something I would probably pull out to use for a comprehensive plan, at least not yet until I learn a little bit more about the process. And I think it's really good if it allows you to do some urban design work, like those photo renderings. A picture's worth 1,000 words. If you can show people what you're talking about and how that would look and how that would work, it really starts the discussion going in a way that you can't imagine from just doing an aerial photo or a view on a colored map. People really resonate to, well, gee, I know where that area is, and I think I'd like it if I saw that, or can you move that over there? And you really get into how that place will look and feel in the future. So that is my summary of the charrette process. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be around for asking. And before I go, this was a pretty quick presentation. There's a lot more to it. If any of your communities are interested in doing a charrette or learning more about it, as a certificate carrying trained person, I would certainly be happy to talk with you offline after the meeting. So thank you very much.